Hey everyone, it's Chris Loud. I hope you're all having a great day so far. In this video, I'm going to share a bold, intuitive abstract painting demo where the focus is on shapes, color, and contrast. This one's a little different from my usual timed warm-up exercises. Normally, I work with several layers to build history and depth, but here I kept things simpler and more direct, more about play and contrast than focusing on layers. Both approaches have their place, so feel free to experiment with whichever one speaks to you in the moment, or a mix of the two. It's a quick, kind of lighthearted practice piece. It's messy, it's loose, and experimental, and that's exactly what I wanted. The goal is to see how playful marks and strong contrast can carry a painting and keep the energy flowing. And before we get rolling, a big thank you to Kathy for the generous Super Thanks donation. Support like this really helps me keep creating and sharing these videos. So I like to begin with random marks because they break the intimidation of a blank surface and really get the energy flowing. You know, overall, this this painting leans into the sloppy side, and I think you'll see that. But that's okay. That's the look I wanted. It's about play and freedom and letting the marks kind of lead the way. The beauty of random marks is that they create surprises, accidental shapes or textures that can become the most interesting parts of the painting sometimes. They loosen us up and remind us this is about exploring, not perfection. And as you'll see now, as I'm working on stronger shapes and colors, the painting already has energy flowing. It's just, one way to start an intuitive abstract, but I find it's one of the easiest. So I'll be working with a limited palette of Pyrrole Red, Brilliant Yellow Green, Prussian Blue, Titanium White, and Mars Black, plus some Artex acrylic markers, a black Sharpie gel pen, and a few bursts of white water-based spray paint. So when I started putting the paint down, I was really just roughly filling in some of the shapes I had created when I was making marks. And instead of carefully mixing everything, I'm using some of the color as it is straight from the tube and roughly brushing it in. That direct application keeps the shapes bold and spontaneous. While in other spots I'm using mixed colors that are a little more subdued, that give me softer transitions and new variations on color. I'm also bringing in titanium white, not just as highlights, but as a way to create tints and open up my palette. When you mix white with, say, Pyrrole Red or Prussian Blue, or even a mix of the two, you get these lighter, quieter tones that play off the stronger, more saturated colors. Some of these shapes end up filled with deep, more powerful hues, while others take on, a little softer, less vibrant tones. So the mix of bold versus subdued starts to build the contrast that helps give the painting more energy. So the eye bounces between intense color blocks and the more toned down areas. And that variety is one of the ways that helps keep the composition feeling alive. So I'll bring in a stencil here, and this is where I use the white water-based spray paint to add a little variety in the texture. One thing that happened though, I didn't cover the edges of the stencil. So I ended up with some overspray and splatter. And that, at first it felt like a mistake. But I think those little droplets in the red and the almost square outline that formed around those four circles actually worked really well with this piece. I mentioned creating surprises through accidents earlier, and this is a good example of that. I think my mistake ended up adding some really interesting details to this piece. And then using Mars Black and Titanium White, I think that's where the deeper contrast really comes in. Those black lines cutting across the piece bring movement. They they almost vibrate against the solid shapes. And the dots and white spray paint add softness, a kind of misty texture that breaks up the solid areas. So this is where energy builds. We have hard edges next to softer fades and bold colors next to more subdued colors and neutral black and white. Contrast doesn't just mean dark versus light. It's also about, quiet versus loud or smooth versus rough. And I'm using a stick here to start roughening up those borders, those black borders that I made with the acrylic marker, because I thought that kind of dulled this down right away. As soon as I started using that, I could tell that I was going to have to come back and probably play with those edges a little bit more. So just using a wooden stick and some black paint, I'm kind of coming back through and like I said, roughening this up, but I think that is also adding a little bit of energy and movement to it. And movement comes from variety and rhythm. I've got repeating circles from the spray paint and the stencil, sweeping diagonal lines, and there's got to be a few scribbles with the Sharpie gel pen, and these marks, they don't have to be perfect. In fact, I think their looseness makes the painting feel more alive. It definitely has a rougher look to it, a more raw look to it, and to me, a more playful look by having those kind of imperfect lines, imperfect borders, and some of the little squiggly marks that you'll see here shortly. And notice how your eye bounces from the red circle to the stripe section and then down into the smaller color blocks. That's movement and action, shapes and contrast, kind of guiding us around the piece. And here's where I start bringing in that Sharpie gel pen and just making some hash marks and some small lines and really kind of playing with some of these shapes a little bit. So at this point, it's mostly about responding. If one area feels too heavy, maybe I add a light mark or a little extra paint, like with these Artex acrylic markers, to help create a little bit more form, or just to break up a little bit of the color, as I did in the green when I added a little bit of yellow to those, just to give a little bit more interest. And if a section feels empty, maybe I bring in a pop of color or a different texture. All right, abstract art, as I've said before, it's a conversation. It's a back and forth. We make a move, we step back, we listen, and then we react and we make the next move. And I think this painting found its balance through the tension between the graphic, rough black lines and the way the colors played off of each other. I'll also show you at the end of the video, I'll show you some close-ups, and you'll be able to see just how rough this is. Again, I happen to like art and painting that is imperfect and kind of rough and raw. And I did the initial bit of this painting in a 15-minute painting session, and then I came back and played with it a little bit more. So overall, I probably spent 20-25 minutes, maybe a little bit more, just kind of playing around with it. So the markers and gel pen add the small moments, the little details that reward a closer look. I want this painting to feel bold from across a room, Although it is it's an 8 by 8, so it's going to be probably a little smaller across the room, but I do want it to stand out from a distance. But also, I want it to be interesting when you get close up. That's where these small details really shine. So if you like this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up. If you would like to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe. And as always, if you have any feedback or questions, I'd love for you to leave me a comment. So I started putting these thin lines with the gel pen and trying to create a little bit of form with this striped area, but it didn't feel like it really was working. So I brought in the acrylic marker again to play with that a little bit more. But I wanted to leave some of those lines in there because I really liked how that looked. So I hope this inspires you to play and have fun when you paint and to experiment with shapes and color and contrast and to start messy and stay loose and trust your gut. When I first was working on this in the first 15 minutes painting session, I didn't really like how this was looking. And I sat on it for just a little bit and came back to it and started playing with it again. And it really kind of grew on me. And I was able to kind of add it just enough in some areas to help this painting work a little bit more. Again, it's a quick and rough and as I said before, somewhat sloppy painting, but sloppy is not always a bad thing. So I'll show you some close-ups here coming up. And you'll be able to see a little bit more detail in these. And I'll put a list in the description of all the tools and paints that I used in this in case you're interested in seeing more about that. So here's the final piece, and I think the first orientation is my favorite. And thanks again to Kathy for the super thanks donation. I really appreciate that. Thanks for watching, and keep on painting.